good morning to everyone joining us today for our Boardroom Bites at 9. Today, we're talking about negotiating with cyber criminals, a really hot topic at this moment, and very interesting. We've got with us Danny Myburgh and Candice Sutherland with us this morning. Danny is of so much experience in cyber crime and negotiating with cyber criminals on ransomware. Candice is got experience in the cyber insurance underwriting space. So we've got two experts in the room today to cover all aspects that you may be wondering about, especially with Poppy, and I'm sure with your insurance renewals or the increased terms as well that you may have seen, which Candice will touch on as well. So I'm not going to take up much time. I'm going to hand over to Danny. If you want to share your screen, Danny's going to start us off this morning, and I'll see everyone again when we get to the Q&A.
100%. Thank you, Vakeshni. Thank you very much for that introduction. Can I just check you can see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Excellent, excellent. Good morning, everybody. Again, what a pleasure to have a chat with you guys and share with you some of the stuff that's happening behind the scenes. Today, we're going to have a very interesting discussion from my side. I'm going to give you a little bit of a glimpse in terms of what happens behind the scene when we have a client that has been the victim of ransomware. What do we do? What's the process with hackers? So we're going to delve a little bit into that, and I think this is one of the first times that we've actually discussed it. But again, it's an honor and a pleasure to be chatting to you this morning. We are going to hopefully blow your mind with some of the information I'm going to share this morning. So in terms of starting off with cybercrime, it's one of the aspects that I never thought that I'd get involved in terms of doing discussions, chats with hackers in terms of, what's the process that we're going to follow, etc. So I never expected to become a negotiator with criminals, but I ended up, and so far I've done about 10 successful negotiations in the past year, more or less, and I've learned quite a lot out of that. So if we look at the environment, and I'm just quickly going to touch on some of the stats that we see, not from any published information out there. This is statistics that we compiled ourselves from the cases that we've been on. So we've done a number of the large incidents that has happened in the past 2 years in South Africa, and from that we could derive a couple of stats. So I think this is really good for us. So we see quite a lot of the hacking going on. If we look at splitting the two between hacking and ransomware, it's more or less a 50-50 split between the two. But the hacking has got different objectives. Sometimes we catch the hackers before they are executing anything, so it's just the illegal access. Sometimes they've gone over to stealing money or to exfiltrating data. Crypto mining, we've had a couple where IT service providers applied the clients with a little bit of a welcoming package, installing crypto mining in the background, and their personnel is mining on the client's environment. And then we've got the ransomware that is hitting the newspapers, very, very, very largely. I think it's a threat to all organizations. We're seeing a huge spike in the number of ransomware attacks. So just quickly running through again and then reiterating in terms of how these attacks are perpetrated, we're still seeing that a large number of the attacks are actually done by means of phishing emails. Malicious mail is still compiled. What we've been seeing in the past couple of months, 8 months or so, is that we've had a large portion of big game hunting, where the hackers will identify an organization, for example, Transnet. We haven't been involved in it, so I'm just using them as an example. But typically in a situation like that, it's where you've got a hacker that has identified the organization, they do their research, they work on that company. We see sometimes up to about 3 months collecting information, utilizing different teams to execute portions of the attack. First, the team will facilitate the access. Thereafter, you'll get your guys logging in that actually does the work internally. And after that, the guys that's handling the negotiations take over. But we're seeing a lot of this, the general large quantity of attacks still, doing it from phishing emails, malware mails being sent out. Then we've got the link on that mail that takes a person to a wrong site. Remember, we can have many different types of compromises. I'm just giving you an example of one to set the scene for us. The victim opens that exploit, executes attachment. We're seeing that in some of the cases we've had where the ransomware, not the ransomware, the malware that facilitated the compromise originally was hidden in a PDF, and all of us, think that a PDF is a safe type of document. But we're seeing that the sophistication level of these attacks are really, really increasing. And if you don't have some of the best malware protection out there, you're not going to block these type of things. They are going to come through your mail. Your antivirus is not going to recognize a zero-day exploit, for example. So first of all, they do a command and control or beacon server on the outside where they pull in additional code. One of the attacks that we had very recently, after they gained access to the environment, they immediately executed some 800 scripts, all automated, that basically switched off everything that was protecting that environment. From there, they could then do simple Dropbox exercises of pulling information into the environment and executing it on the inside. We're still seeing where they create backdoors. On average, we're seeing between 5 and 8 user accounts that they typically compromise and utilize during the attack. They utilize those also as backdoors for them. They are collecting a lot of the passwords internally, and that's also where that simple passwords that they are able to crack allows them to expand their foothold in the environment. My apologies for that. So they crack the passwords, they then gain larger access to the environment. They identify what information they want to gather in that environment. One of the scary things that we've seen in the past couple of attacks, I would say over the last year more or less, is that we're seeing double extortion attacks where they exfiltrate data first and then execute ransomware. So if you restore the environment, they still have information that they copied out. Internationally, they're also talking now about a third level of extortion, where if the hackers exfiltrate data, they work through that data, and they will also start, if you don't pay them the ransom demand, they will then start extorting your clients, your patients, whatever information you hold. They will then contact those individuals and start extorting them also for money. So we are definitely seeing that they are progressing into deeper, more diabolical type of attacks. So this is a typical ransom note that will appear on your screen. It can take various different formats, but they'll basically announce themselves and tell you, listen, your data has been encrypted. They're very helpful. They will give you an explanation of exactly how to buy cryptocurrency, where to go and buy it. Literally here you can see they give you back and next steps. So they facilitate the process in terms of giving you guidance in terms of buying the Bitcoin. We typically advise clients not to execute or access that ransom note, because a lot of the instances when you access that ransom note, the clock starts ticking literally on their side. So they typically give you 24 hours, 48 hours to respond to them. If you don't respond, then they'll escalate the attack, they'll release information, etc. But if you don't make contact with them, we've got that little bit of leeway of first getting our act together before we start engaging with them. Then also, we see that they would after you made that initial contact, they will then give you something up to about 7 days to make the payment, because they know that not all organizations actually has cryptocurrency lying around, or the facility to quickly get cryptocurrency up and running. Now coming to the practical side of things, your data is encrypted. What do we consider? What's the approach that we follow? Number one, we advise clients, don't negotiate with criminals. We are funding crime. And we don't want to actually go to that level. But the unfortunate part is, if your business depends on it, if you don't have backups, if all your data is destroyed, what alternatives do you have? So we've been involved in quite a number of these situations. I would say in about less than 30% of our cases that we've handled, we had to actually engage with the hackers, where the client was in a position where we couldn't recover the data from the environment. So number one, we don't want to actually fuel this environment. The opinions that we got so far is that it is not illegal to pay the ransom, but there's a couple of things that you need to be aware of, and we'll touch on them a little bit later. So we want to decide, was there data that was also stolen, and what's the possibility that data was stolen before they encrypted your data, and what's the implications of that? You might be a medical practitioner, you might be an organization that's got critical information, credit card information, those type of things. All of that needs to be taken into consideration when we start negotiating with the hackers. So we want to check, first of all, if the data is just encrypted, no data is exfiltrated. Do we have, number one, working, recent, and healthy backups? The problem is many organizations think that they've got working backups until they need them. And then they realize, nobody's actually tested those backups. Even if you do pay a company to do it, a lot of times they take a shortcut. And unfortunately, it's, as luck would have it, that's the first time that they didn't check the backups, that's when it actually fails. So also, if you've got a situation where you've got a simple solution where you just plug in an external drive to your network, as luck would have it, while that hard drive is plugged into, the encryption will run and you'll lose your backups. So if you follow a process like this, for example, have two backups. One that you use every second day, and always make sure that the one is plugged in while the other one is unplugged. There's more sophisticated ways of doing it, so air gap backup is always required. Then we want to consider any alternatives. Can we rebuild your data? Can we recapture the data? Can we get a team in, for example, to capture the data? Can we get legal decryption? We've got access to databases and the secret API, etc., where we can sometimes get decrypted keys because they do, arrest people, and there are databases of known keys that's available out there. So we can actually try and decrypt the information, but the level of encryption is really, really high. That to last. Another alternative is actually to consider, should the business start from scratch, building up their computer systems. If you're a small firm, it might not be a problem, but if you're a large firm, that could mean that your business can go bankrupt. We look at, typically, in considering whether we want to or need to pay the ransom or not, what is the cost implications in terms of the business interruption and the successful continuing of that business, as opposed to the ransom demand. There are global firms that does decryption or attempt to do the decryption if you pay for it. But what we've seen in the past is that they're sometimes more expensive than the hackers are actually. It comes down to having a decision in terms of what is the best interest, what is in the best interest for that organization between paying or not paying the ransom. Then also looking at the legal requirements. We can't just pay a hacker, because although it is legal in South Africa to pay a ransom demand, it might be that that group is associated with a terrorist group, or that they are on a sanction list by the Americans. And if we do pay them, you as the director or the responsible party can actually be held liable for supporting terrorism internationally. That is a huge situation because of the fact that all of these payments are being done on cryptocurrency and the blockchain, it means that that can be monitored, it can be traced, and the Americans are definitely looking at this. So we have to be very careful in terms of how we conduct these payments. We also have some requirements in terms of local requirements that we need to consider in terms of what's the taxman's opinion on this, the Department of Treasury, the FIC, for example. So there's many things that we need to consider, which I would not advise a person doing on your own, but rather getting somebody in that has done this before, or that can help you with legal advice. In terms of the emotional side of it, we have seen that a couple of our clients has tried or has successfully as well negotiated with the criminal, but we see in that situation that a client typically is very, very emotional. It's their business, it's an attack against them, and that's not what we need, or that's not what is best in that situation. We want to be calm, we want to stabilize that environment, we don't want to worsen it, so it's better having somebody conducting that negotiations on your behalf. As I said, we don't advise to access the ransom site until such time that that a decision has been taken, that we need to engage with him. We want to identify what type of ransomware is running, so that we can also identify the threat actor or the group that's responsible, because we want to conduct an intelligence exercise on them. We want to do research to say, if previously somebody is paid, did they give the decryption key, did they destroy the data, etc., so that we can take as much as possible informed decision in the environment. A lot of times it's not that easy, but if you've identified the hacker group as well, and they don't decrypt the data if we pay them, we can name and shame them, and next victims can maybe benefit from that information. We want to establish a third-party communication channel, because we don't want to reply from your official email account, because those emails can also be leaked, and that can be as damaging to your reputation, if it becomes known that you are actually negotiating with threat actors. We want to be unemotional. We want to be honest. If they catch you out with lies and stuff, it all deteriorate that whole ransom process. And then we basically start with the negotiations. We're seeing that they do have teams that perform on the follow the sun situation, where if you see somebody, you'll see that his English is really good, and then after a couple of hours, it switches over to somebody that you can obviously see this is a new person you're talking to. The English isn't that good. So over 72 hours that we do discuss with them, we see that they hand over to each other. So I'm getting the idea that they've got something like a call center. A lot of times they will also tell you, listen, I need to go and speak to management. One of the previous ones that I've done recently, they actually said they need to go and consult with their CEO. So they're seeing themselves as more or less a legitimate type of organization. So we typically try to get the payment down. We clarify what the payment process is, what's the terms and conditions, if you want to call it that. And on average, internationally, they're reporting that they can have a 10% discount on the amount. So far, I've been lucky. I've averaged about a 38% discount on the negotiations. But we've seen that the amount of ransom is going up. One of the highest ones that we've been involved is they asked for about 88 million rand. Luckily, the client didn't need to pay that one, but we are seeing that it's going into the tens of millions that they're now asking, and some of the clients are paying it because they literally have no alternative if their backups are gone. What we want to do is we want to get the client to sign off on it on a board level, take the decision whether we are going to pay the ransom, signing off all the contracts and stuff, because I don't want necessarily coming behind me and prosecuting me for making payments if I can't show them that I was acting on behalf of a client. And then we have the money transfer process. So you need to make provision. In a lot of the banks are actually blocking payments going to crypto platforms because of the fraudulent transactions going on. So there's a waiting period. Don't think that you'll be able to make the payment within a 24-hour cycle necessarily. We want to also buy the cryptocurrency, and making sure that that is in a safe environment. So typically what I do is I pay a very small amount to the hackers, ask them to confirm it. When they've confirmed it, we make more payments. We try to break up the payment so that they don't get money at the same time. So we ask typically, if I pay you half, will you give me half of the decryption keys? We try to manage the process as best as possible. And then when we do get the decryption keys, there's a very strict process that needs to be followed, because the data that you're actually decrypting contains the malware. So we can't just repair it in your environment because it can start running immediately. If that decryption also fails, it destroys that piece of data. So you have to copy before you start with the decryption process. Best is to consult with somebody that has been through the process previously to do it. And then if we get down to the last portion, is to continuously monitor the dark web and the internet. If they have stolen data, are they sticking to their word? We're doing this now for clients up to 2 years after the incident has happened. Candice, I hope that that's given a good overview of what happens behind the scenes, and I'm looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you so much, Danny. That was really fascinating. So my portion of the presentation is going to be more around a solution and how you can actually respond to a cyber incident. So how we would define cybercrime, it's any criminal activity that involves a computer or the internet. When we are presenting to clients, very often clients will think that cybercrime is just it's just credit card theft, but it is so much broader than that. It is any criminal activity that involves a computer or any criminal activity that is done over the internet. I want to spend a second talking about my least favorite C word, coronavirus, and how cybercrime attacks have increased. So cyber criminals show no ethical boundaries and will continue to attack wherever a vulnerability exists. Microsoft found that hackers had launched coronavirus-themed cyber attacks in every country in the world. The success of these attacks had a direct correlation to the growth of the pandemic, and countries with the highest outbreak numbers were also the most affected by COVID-themed clickbait. Hackers strike when countries are at the peak of their pandemic and citizens are looking for health information online. And since the beginning of January, over 16,000 new coronavirus-related domains were registered. It is the perfect opportunity for a hacker to exploit your fears. If we look at some stats in South Africa, the average number of breached records in a South African data breach is 21,090 records versus a global average of 24,615. The average cost per lost or stolen record is going to cost you 2,235 Rand. Why that figure is important is because if we take 21,090 times that figure, that would tell us what our exposure is. So for you to understand what your specific cyber exposure is take your amount of employees, add your amount of clients, look at your data destruction policy. So let's say you're an SME, you've been in business since 1996 and you don't have a data destruction policy, then you would need to times the total amount of records that you store since 1996 by 2325, and that will tell you what your exposure is. If you're an FSP, it means that you have to retain records for 5 years. So take the total number of records stored over the last 5 years, times that by 2325, and that would be your cyber exposure. The average total cost of a data breach in South Africa, 32 million Rand. And South Africa has the highest global probability of a repeat data breach at 43%. So just because you've been hacked once, it doesn't mean that you won't be hacked again, especially if you have not gone through the process that Danny has explained to actually get the hackers off your system. Then they just sit and wait for a little bit until they can launch a second attack. These are some articles that have been posted freely in the public domain where companies in South Africa have been hacked. Historically, companies were under no obligation to publicize the fact that they had had a breach, and the Protection of Personal Information Act will change that. But if you read these articles, lots of companies, tracker systems hit again, AfriHost servers are unsecure, Hetzner hit by another incident, Liberty shares fall by 5% after cyber breach, 60 million records, Standard Bank computer was hacked, 300 million Rand in ATM fraud, So companies are being hacked, and it's not just your massive multinational global companies. It is also your SME. And that's where it actually is. It's the low-hanging fruit for hackers, because these are companies that do not have massive amounts to spend on dedicated IT individuals, on firewalls and tech to keep hackers out. So they are the low-hanging fruit for hackers and a prime target, essentially. And hacker and an SME, a small family-owned business, that means that you are essentially destroying that entire family and the lineage of the business that has been in place for however many years. I want to spend a second talking about Zoom bombing. So Zoom has upgraded their platform. Zoom is safe to use, but prior to them actually upgrading their platform and everybody going into a COVID world, there were lots of issues with Zoom and a technique called Zoom bombing. So Zoom bombing is when an uninvited person joins the Zoom meeting, any person who finds the link. So if IOD posted this on their website saying, please join us for the session, anyone can join that session. It's when they join a meeting that is in progress and they will post funny pictures, post pornography, post threatening messages. I'll show you some examples of what has happened. So this was a video meeting hosted by the Department of Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities, which was hacked, and the journalists saw nothing but pornographic images instead of the live feed. The very next day, the National Assembly Programming Committee was also hacked. The meeting had barely started at 9 a.m. when 50 seconds into the meeting, DA Chief Whip Natasha Mazzoni was proposing the agenda and porn appeared all over the screen. The hacker then proceeded to racially abuse Thandi Modise, who was trying to chair that virtual meeting. Apologies. So imagine if you are the person chairing that meeting, what do? Do you just leave? Do you just exit the meeting? Imagine the reputational damage. So this is an article which was posted by Melrose Church, and I'll read you an excerpt. It says, we are disgusted by the unfortunate incident that occurred yesterday on our live stream Sunday service. Our screen share was hacked by an unknown person who displayed content of a pornographic nature. The content displayed was extremely traumatic for us as a congregation, and Melrose Church unreservedly apologizes for the trauma and hurts inflicted on each and every one of our viewers by this disgusting display on our live stream, especially as we are mindful that your children may have been with you and part of the service. So cybercrime is not something that you see on TV. It's not something, that Mr. Robot only does. It is something that is happening in South Africa all the time. And South Africa is ranked as the 3rd worst country in the world for cybercrime attacks. And again, we have the highest global probability of a repeat data breach. So if we look at Poppy came into in 2013, regulator in 2018, and the 1-year grace period started on the 1st of July 2020. What Poppy says is that I, as a South African citizen, have a constitutional right that my privacy will be protected. The company that I have entrusted that data to, if they do not protect that information, their fine is 10 million rand or up to 10 years in prison. What I want to point out now that that 12-month period has elapsed and fines are applicable, that under Section 99(1), which came into effect 1 July 2021, the employer may be held liable for the conduct of its employees, regardless of whether there was willful or negligent conduct on the part of the employer. So because Poppy is strict liability, it means that no negligence is required in order for you to face that fine. Hypothetically, you are waiting, apologies, for an Uber to fetch you, and I run past you and steal your phone. On your phone, you may have your work emails. That would be seen as a Poppy breach because you would have your work emails on that device and I can access that sensitive information. Sorry, I seem to have a bit of a frog in my throat, so please excuse me. So one way to mitigate your loss, the one and only way to truly mitigate your loss, is to purchase a cyber insurance policy. A cyber insurance policy has 2 triggers. One is a privacy breach and the second is a network breach. There's lots of words on the screen, and let me simplify it. A privacy breach is a breach of confidentiality or right to privacy of any employee or any client which is on your system. A network breach means that you, the client, must be hacked in order for the policy to respond. It could be either trigger, either of these that triggers the policy. It doesn't have to be both. So spending a second just explaining what the policy covers. Your insuring clause A is your cyber liability. This will cover the defense and settlement of your third party, which is your client, suing you because you have a privacy breach or a network breach. So your client or your employee's information was leaked. That is going to trigger that person suing you because of that event. And this is the module that is going to defend you in court and pay for the settlement. In terms of the fines and penalties, because you are able to insure the fine, the policy does make provisions. Because Poppy is strict liability, it's not like a fine from SARS that says you didn't pay your tax return, now you have this penalty, so that it teaches you a lesson so that you don't do it again. Poppy is strict liability, so no negligence is required, and you are able to insure that fine. So the policy makes specific provision for regulatory fines or punitive damages imposed by the body to the extent insurable and payable by law. So what that means in the most basic terms is that when we make representation, because by law you have to do that following a privacy breach, to the information regulator, based on the merits of that case and what actually occurred, Panzi Tlakula will determine whether you are able to use your insurance policy to cover the fine, or if she would want the company to cover that specific expense themselves. Your insuring clause B is your crisis management and notifications expenses. What that specific part of the policy will pay for is for you to notify every single person affected by the incident, the privacy breach or the network breach. So that is your employees as well as your clients. It's going to notify all of them. It's going to do a public relations campaign. The only way to truly try and mitigate your reputational damage following a breach is if you have a proper, qualified PR company that has dealt with these sort of incidents. They will monitor things like Hello Peter for clients complaining about you. They'll monitor social media to see if anybody has anything bad to say. I can't get hold of company X, their phone has been down for 3 days. Actually, because you're trying to remediate your systems following an incident. So PR is a very, very important part to deal with the reputational damage associated with an event. Your remediation services are things like credit and identity theft monitoring for every person affected by the breach, and your cyber policy will pay for that. Your next module is your data recovery and business interruption module. So this is going to pay for specialists, not your next door neighbor's son who studied computers for 6 months in 2002, actual specialists like Danny from Cyanre to investigate, contain, manage, and recover your systems from the incident. It covers your network or business interruption. What that means, if you look at a traditional liability policy, it has a physical damage trigger. So it says if there's theft, fire, flood, and you cannot continue your operations, then we will pay you your business interruption. Now with a cyber event, there's no physical damage. I have hacked into your systems, the hackers hacked into your systems, there's no physical damage. So your business interruption trigger on a cyber policy has a non-physical damage triggering event. But we will cover the business interruption. It's the amount of hours that you are down following an incident. When we look at the proposal form, it has a host of questions. We are trying to understand your IT infrastructure, which obviously we don't have any insight into. So the proposal form must be completed correctly. One of the most important questions is revenue and records. Revenue, because we need to quantify your business interruption. So if you are a company doing 10 million Rand revenue and you are down for a period of 3 days, that's a very different hourly rate to if you were a 1.5 billion Rand company and you're down for 3 days. So we have seen quite a reluctance in the last 12 months of people not wanting to disclose their revenue because there's been such a massive drop following COVID that last year their revenue was 650 million, this year it's 250, but we need to understand what that business interruption calculation is because that is factored into the premium. This module will also cover the cost for you to restore and recover your data, as well as the operations. It covers things like increased cost of working, which would be your staff overtime, and any loss of business income is also covered by the policy. If we look at the cyber extortion module, and this weighs in quite heavily with what Danny has presented. Again, it's expenses for specialists to investigate and mitigate the cyber extortion threat. Where it is not possible for the specialist to actually recover the operations, we will negotiate and we will settle the ransom from your cyber policy. If you have a 1 million rand cyber policy limit and the extortion demand is 5 million rand, obviously you don't have enough cover. But all of those are taken into consideration when doing the ransom so that we can cover it from the policy. What a lot of globally, what a lot of reinsurers are now dictating is that the cyber extortion module specifically should be either sublimited or subject to 50% co-insurance with the insured. What that means is that if you had a 10 million rand cyber policy, your cyber extortion specific module would be 5 million rand, subject to 50% co-insurance, meaning that 2.5 million rand will be covered by the insurer and 2.5 million rand will be covered by you, the client. The reasoning behind this is that historically, and there have been some massive ransomware claims of late, but what the client's stance is I have a 10 million rand cyber policy, I have a 10 million rand extortion demand. The extortion demand is 7.5 million rand just paid from the policy. And all they want to do is get back up online and trading. Remember, you're in a catastrophic situation. It's very emotional, there's panic. My clients are starting to notice, I just want to get back up online, pay the ransom, and I don't want to try and settle it. I don't want to try and negotiate it lower. I don't want you to try and recover it. I don't want you to go and find the code to decrypt, just get me back up online. That is not the best process to follow because if, as Danny has said, what we don't want to do is fund criminals. So globally, there is this new stance where if I say to you, you have a 10 million rand cyber policy, your cyber extortion limit is only 5 million, of which you are going to have to pay half of that, 2.5 million, then there's a mindset change of maybe we should negotiate, maybe we should wait that extra 24 hours to get the decryption key. Maybe we should allow the experts to actually do what we're paying them to do and actually mitigate and resolve the incidents instead of first stance being just pay the ransom. So that's where that thought process comes in. Depending on what sort of business you are in, there are some optional extensions that you can purchase on a cyber policy. I'll run you through them super quick. It is not applicable to every business. That's why they are optional extensions. Number one, your initial response phase. What that will do is it waives your deductible for a period of 72 hours. Why we have specifically chosen 72 hours is because that is the average time it takes from notification to the incident being resolved. So it means that there would be no deductible applicable on your policy. And this is generally offered to clients that have a high deductible. So if we are presenting to a client and they want to purchase a 50 million rand cyber policy and their deductible is 250,000 or 500 or a million rand, the initial response phase would make sense. If you are a micro SME revenue between 0 and 10 million rand and your deductible is 15,000, it doesn't really make sense for you to purchase initial response phase because the deductible is so low. Our second one is e-financial loss. So e-financial loss, because monetary loss is specifically excluded under a cyber policy, it is not the intention to cover the consequential loss of the hack, which could be somebody stealing your funds. We've added this optional module called e-financial loss. And what that will cover is the unrecoverable loss of funds for which the insured is legally responsible as a direct result of a system security incident by a third party. This is not a commercial crime policy that says it covers a dishonest or fraudulent act by an employee, your first party. This would have to be a cyber event by an external party in order for that e-financial loss module to kick in. OSP is your outsourced service provider. So if you are a client that doesn't have an IT service team and you outsource everything, it provides cover for a named service provider. It's not blanket cover. So you would have to specify who your OSP is, your outsourced service provider, and it provides cover to you For the defense and settlement of the liability claim arising from your data being compromised at an OSP, it covers the business interruption losses and also costs for you to change to alternate service provider if needed. Your physical damage, that is the cost to replace or repair direct physical damage to tangible property, which belongs to you or is rented or leased or hired by you as a direct result of a system security incident. Phone phreaking would be when somebody hacks your PABX or your VoIP system and they use your phone lines to make premium rated calls, they use all of your bandwidth, and then you are obligated to pay that massive phone bill at the end of the month. Our last one is PCI. So PCI is payment card industry. If you are accepting payment via debit or credit card, you have to be PCI DSS accredited, Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard. That comes with its own set of regulations. And this specific module covers the direct monetary fines, penalties, assessments, and chargebacks, which you are obligated to pay in terms of the merchant services as a direct result of somebody hacking your system and non-compliance with PCI DSS standards. So what is the director's liability following a cyber breach? If we look at the fiduciary duties, the fiduciary duties have been codified by the Companies Act, and it says that claims can be brought against directors and executives in their personal capacity. The Companies Act states that any person who contributes any section of the Act is liable to any other person for loss or damage suffered by that person as a result of the contravention. If we look at technology and information governance under Principle 12 of King report, the board must ensure that the IT responsibilities are managed, appropriately resourced, and sufficiently defined. Clients affected by a cyber breach can hold the board of directors accountable on the basis that they failed to address the weaknesses or loopholes in their system. Shareholders can sue directors for the decline in share price, the costs involved, as well as the reputational and brand damage following a cyber breach. Under POPI, there's a right to privacy, so directors can face fines, penalties, and even imprisonment according to POPI. Apologies again. In terms of regulatory action, depending on the framework and the industry within which you operate, complaints can be made to the CIPC, who will then investigate and allow action to be taken against the companies or directors. Now, as a director of a company, it is extremely difficult for you to be completely au fait with IT and cybercrime and ransomware and what the latest zero-day attack is. It's not your role. It's not within the scope of your role to know that. And the threat landscape changes constantly. But the problem is that directors are being named as defendants in costly and intrusive litigation. A company's financial, reputational, and operational success rests on the board of directors. And these directors do undertake to manage the business with due care, skill, and diligence per Section 76(3) of the Companies Act. Expenses such as incident response and remediation can be crippling for any business. And the most onerous would be the consequential loss of bottom line revenue and reputational damage to a client, customer, patient, and employee relationships. How do you quantify exactly what your reputational damage is worth? So cyber insurance is definitely something that can assist you following a cyber incident. It puts the proper people in place. If I can summarize it into one sentence, a cyber policy is reactive, so it kicks in after the event. Incident response policy that will give you access to experts that have dealt with these situations and get you back up online and trading, mitigate your reputational damage, cover the fines if necessary, make representation to the information regulator so that you, as directors of a company, can rest assured that your business will still be in place 6 months down the line, a year down the line following a cyber incident. So that is it from me, and I want to thank you so much for your time, and we will change over to Q&A.
Thank you, Candice and Danny. That was a very full and I think informative session with lots of information shared. So to our attendees, if you've got questions, you can post them in the Q&A or raise your hand. To just kick us off, to start off with, is this an issue only just for large companies being compromised, or should, smaller companies also worry about this as well?
Danny, do you want to share some insight on that one?
I'll definitely jump in. So as I've mentioned, we're seeing that there's quite a large number of these attacks that are aimed at large corporations, where we're seeing the big game hunting. The possibility of a Pick and Pay or Momentum or a Transnet having more money than a Danny Myburgh is really good. But we do see that the attackers still send out the millions and millions of phishing mail, and whoever falls for it, then becomes a victim. So I would say we are definitely seeing targeted attacks against the large organizations, but the market is flooded with the just random attacks going on against the smaller and the medium enterprises. So everybody is at risk. It's unfortunately not something where you can say, listen, I'm immune against this or safe against it.
Thanks, Danny. A question for you, Candice, from Alison. If we outsource the data management to a service provider, what are the implications for us for cyber insurance?
Perfect. Thank you so much, Alison. So what we need to remember is under POPI, it says that the custodian of the data is the one that will be held liable. So let's assume I am Candice's attorneys. I have no internal IT infrastructure, which I manage. I don't have an IT team. I don't have an IT individual. Everything is stored in the cloud. If my client's information, my client consented that I may retain their information, whatever information it is, I am the custodian of that data, therefore I will be held liable. So just because you're using an external service provider or everything is in the cloud, it doesn't mean that you will not be held liable if something goes wrong. So it's very important to check when looking at your service providers, what their limitation of liability clause is in the contract that you have signed with them. Do they say, I will provide you with these services, but if something goes wrong, you're totally on your own? Or do they say, there's a cap, so I will, my limitation of liability clause will be to a maximum R1 million. So you can't negate responsibility. You can't push that responsibility onto your third-party service provider just because that is the service they provide to you. What our legislation states is that you are the custodian of that data. Therefore, you will be held liable if something goes wrong with it.
Thank you, Candice. Veronica, you've got your hand up, so I've enabled, if you want to unmute, you can ask your question live. Through. There we
Everyone.
go.
Sorry, I was just interested in terms of whether there are facilities, or I'm not sure how you call it, but like to track these hackers. I've read on the internet, usually they come from Russia or China. Is there any sort of ways, I mean, like, if you like, for example, I'm not sure it's the same parallel. If you like on offshore accounts, you can actually track the money. I would assume that there's some sort of tools or trace where you can track these hackers, and can you take them to task even though they're international?
Great question. Thank you, Veronique. Yes, it is possible. So number one, the first thing that we do is we try to identify the location from where they are. So the very first thing that we do is get on the scene, determine what the type of ransomware is, because we're also seeing that ransomware has got a very unique signature. So I can make my ransomware available. We've got stuff like ransom as a service, where any person can download the ransomware. But we see that the various groups are making subtle changes to that ransomware, because I don't want, when I execute the ransom, the ransomware, I don't want the money going to Candice. I want it to come to me. So I make a change to the software, and those fingerprints we can utilize to identify the group. Also, if we do research into that strain of ransomware, we can establish what group it is, more or less, but it doesn't necessarily equate to that we are sure that it's a specific group. Then we also identify the IP addresses where they came through, that going back to up to 200 days, so that's how long a hacker can be in an environment. So it's not something that you can do quickly. It's something that we need to analyze, go through the logs, see where they came in originally, because that's where you get the truest trace back to the hackers. Then also, when they start giving us their communication channels, what email are they using? Typically, it's a Proton type mail account that's anonymous. So that's also associated with certain groups. They give us specific ransom notes, etc. We can utilize that to identify them. And then they also give us the crypto wallets. Now, if it's a brand new wallet, we can't trace or link that wallet to a new or to a group. But if the wallet already received previous ransom payments, we can identify which group it comes from. And then we do work very closely with the US Secret Service here in South Africa, the Interpol chaps as well, the Hawks, as well as your financial institutions like the FIC, FSCA, etc., so that we can try and identify these groups. Maybe just for your notice, we did assist with quite a big arrest about 4 months ago of a syndicate operating from Cape Town, and one of their leaders was sitting here in Midstream Estate, where we and the Hawks actually arrested about 15 of them. So we do have successes, but it does take long.
Thank you, Danny. Quite a few questions coming through. There's quite a few also on the insurance as well, but maybe let's ask one or two of Joy Marie has got 2 questions around boards specifically. The first one is King 4 Principle 12 recommends that boards should be proactive around IT governance. So what are some of the proactive tips that boards can ask of its management team to ensure that there's effective oversight? And then following that, is there any frameworks or toolkits that can support boards in exercising their fiduciary responsibilities? I mean, I know there's CORBIT, there's ISO, that's more in the implementation, but I'm not sure if you guys are aware of anything specifically at board level.
Awesome. So from our perspective as an insurer, if we had a client that was ISO 27001 accredited, we would allow a discount on premium because we know that that client has taken good corporate governance to try and secure their systems. I think the first point of entry is actually see how vulnerable your systems are. So do a vulnerability scan, do a penetration test, and then when you know what the vulnerabilities are, bearing in mind that they do change all the time, and a pen test is a snapshot moment in time, look at historically what your system is, start remediating those. A lot of companies do not have the funds available to have an ethical hacker sit on a system every single day, but having good anti-malware, doing simulated phishing attacks on your employees that you can actually hold them to task saying, okay, John, we've run 7 simulated phishing attacks over the last 6 months. You have fallen for all 7, despite the training, despite pointing this out to you. We now need to take stricter action. So from an IT perspective, to go through some sort of massive ISO 27001 or through PCI accredited, PCI DSS assessments, those things do cost a lot of money. But there are companies like Cyanre that you can employ to come and have a look at your IT system, identify what the weaknesses are. If you are using outdated systems, you know, an outdated system is you leaving your front door and your security gate unlocked, allowing a hacker to come in because you've lost the key. There's no way for you to patch or update an outdated system. And it's exactly the same as losing your front door key and then just leaving it open and hoping for the best. So there are definitely things that companies can do to mitigate their cyber exposure. And that would be things like staff awareness, staff training, simulated phishing attacks, vulnerability scans, penetration tests, and getting an expert in to say, this is my IT network. I didn't set it up. I used Dial-A-Nerd in 1997 and you know, they set up my infrastructure and that's the only time that they were ever here. Help me fix my system and try and close those loopholes that are open to hackers to try and get in. I hope I've answered that question nicely.
Can I also maybe just add on?
Please.
And I think, you know, one of the things that boards can do, don't trust people to do what they're supposed to do. It needs to be tested, whether it's your own staff or whether it's an outsourced service provider. If you've got somebody that does something simple like responsible for backing up your data, walk in on a Monday morning, tell them, I want you to show me, Can we restore Friday's backup? Go through simulations, test the people. That's the only way. The problem that we've got as managers is we need to trust somebody that's doing something that we can't with our eyes go and verify. The IT department is, or the IT system is, dark, the dark web more or less. So run tests, run simulations. That's the only way that you're actually going to know that these things are being done.
Thank you. I hope that answered some of your questions, Joy Marie. I've just posted as well a link in the chat group from one of the papers we did in our board governance forum a while ago on cyber resilience, which does provide some practical questions boards can ask. And we are looking at updating that and doing some more. So I'm sure we can maybe get Candice and Danny involved to put some practical questions boards can actually ask on the topic. The next one we've got is from Ian, and he wants to know, have any directors of boards been sued or charged following an attack? And if not, why, given what we see on directors' responsibility? So I guess, is there current stats on that?
So I think that's do you want to go, Danny?
No, I wanted to say from my side, I don't know. What we've Candice, you might have more statistics and stuff, but what I've seen is since the POPI Act, about 3 to 6 months before the POPI Act came into effect, we saw that the legal advice that the guys are getting is a lot more stringent than what we had a year ago. Also, what I've seen in the last 6 incidents that we've been involved in the last 2 months or so is that the banks are clamping down on so if you're providing a service to a bank or a third party, they are on you. Some of our clients are complaining that, or some of the victims are complaining that they don't have enough time to focus on managing this crisis, as the third party involved people are requesting meetings. Their legal team wants to know what's going on. So it looks like it is going to be a reality for us in South Africa. If it hasn't started yet, it is going to happen. Sorry, Candice.
No, perfect. Thank you, Danny. I think to note that the fines only became applicable 1 July 2021. So it's been in place for 2 months. So historically, if you were breached or hacked, you didn't have to publicize that. You didn't have to make representation to the regulator. So a lot of companies, to try and mitigate the reputational damage, just didn't tell anybody until somehow it got out onto social media. So I don't think there is any precedent just yet, because the act is only essentially, the fine has only been applicable for the last 2 months. But we are monitoring that closely. We are obviously chatting to the information regulator and keeping up to date with them all the time. So as soon as we do hear about anything actually happening, we would be happy to share that information.
Thanks, Candice. And I think with that, there was a comment in the chat group and by, just going to open this up a little bit, Abraham, and Fabian also wants to know, who are the companies that offer cyber insurance? Liability. And then the other question was around, if you can maybe just expand, what's the reasoning behind, we had this conversation before we started, of that ransomware limit on the insurance, and why is the full cover not covered?
Perfect. So there are multiple companies that offer cyber insurance. How our license works as underwriters is that we are not mandated to deal with clients directly. So our clients are insurance brokers. So you would speak to your insurance broker and say to them, you're looking for a cyber insurance quote. They would then go to market, which is all of the underwriters, and obtain multiple quotes from each one. And then you would, have a look at those, see in terms of affordability, in terms of coverage, which is all written in plain English so that everybody can understand on the quote which is the best option for you. But there are some various companies that do offer it. In terms of the reinsurance market, so reinsurance is the people who write our treaties to tell us what we can and can't do, what we can and can't cover, and they would help us when a claim comes in terms of paying that claim. The reinsurance general stance is, historically, what they have found is that if a client has a cyber policy, and let's say that cyber policy is 10 million rand, an extortion demand will come in for 2, 5, 8 million rand, doesn't matter what the amount is. All the client is concerned about is getting back up online and trading and not letting anybody find out that this incident has occurred, that they don't want to do the data recovery, they don't want to negotiate the ransom, they don't actually want to find the code to decrypt the system. They just say, pay the ransom because I have 10 million Rand cover. So the general thought now is if we have to sublimit that, so we say you have a 10 million Rand cyber policy, the extortion is only going to be 5 million Rand, but it's going to be 50% co-insured with you, the client, meaning the underwriter, the insurer will cover 2.5 million Rand, you will cover 2.5 million Rand. Then all of a sudden the mindset is completely changed to, if I have to pay 2.5 million Rand, I'd rather let you actually investigate what happened, actually find the code to decrypt, actually try and recover my system, instead of me just saying, board decision is you must pay the ransom, go ahead and do it because you want to be back up online. So that is the thought process behind the co-insurance module, and it would be on your higher limit. So if you had a 50 million Rand cyber policy, sorry, then your extortion module would be 25 million Rand, but it would be subject to 50% co-insurance with the client. I'm going to grab a glass of water. Sorry, please excuse me for 1 second.
Sure, Candice. Well, we're kind of already at 10, but there is one more question around cyber insurance policy. So we'll wait for Candice to come back. But maybe, Danny, for you, I mean, you've touched on this already, but what are some of the things you have seen, you know, in practice that actually help limit the impact to a client, you know, if there is an attack, and what they shouldn't do to make things worse? What you've seen in practice?
The number one, you know, the fact that you've got healthy backups could cut out that whole ransom demand portion. So if they come with a 10 million or 20 million, if you've got healthy backups, you can recover. We don't need to consider the payment. We can get the company back up and running. So backups is really, really important for me. And then, as Candice has said, stuff like outdated software. We shouldn't be running outdated software anymore. Patch management on your firewall, open ports on the firewall, and poor passwords. We're seeing that people are using the same password everywhere. And even, you know, if you use a password like $$W0, those type of passwords, the hackers knows them. So even though it might look for us like strong passwords, they're actually very weak passwords. Rather have a sentence. So those are the type of things that, you know, is your basic point of compromises or causes of compromises that we see.
Thanks. Candice, a question around what are some of the exclusions that we should be aware of in cyber insurance policies? And a question from myself is, you know, I see there's an increased need now on policies in terms of requirements, or just in general, to actually audit your key service providers, you know, that have access to information. What is the extent of those audits? You know, what are insurance companies looking for from this audit that they'd want us to perform?
Awesome. So in terms of the exclusions, there would be your standard generic sort of war, riot, terrorism, that sort of thing. The cyber specific ones would be that you cannot use any counterfeit software. If you are using counterfeit software or software that has been downloaded illegally, and then that resulted in an interception, that we couldn't cover that. So that would be pirated software, that sort of stuff. Also, if you obtained your client's information illegally, then we would not be able to cover that. So happy to send a wording which has the full list of exclusions, but the two specific ones is counterfeit or pirated software. And if you obtain that client's information illegally, then that would pose a problem when trying to respond to an incident. In terms of you surveying your outsourced service provider, always go with a reputable company. You know, it's a specific question on the cyber proposal form. Do you outsource any of your services? And who do you outsource it to? So if it is to Candice's computers that started trading on the 1st of July, 2021 versus Terraco, you know, Terraco that has been in business for multiple years, multi-billion Rand company, world renowned, has all of their certifications. We as underwriters would be far more comfortable with you using Terraco, Metrofile as your backups instead of your husband that just started a company because it's quite lucrative. But always look at the limitation of liability clause in the contracts that you sign. So if shit hits the fan, what is that OSP going to do to help you, the client who's actually the victim, when the interception happened on their side? Do they say, sorry, too bad, we're not going to assist at all? or we are going to limit our exposure to a specific amount, or will they step in and help you? Sorry. Murphy's Law, when you're trying to present, there's a frog in your throat. Apologies. Hope I answered that question. I don't think I have any more words left.
Thank you, Candice.
No problem.
I think, Danny, you want to add to that?
No, I'm happy. Candice has put the cherry on the top.
Thank you. And no worries, Candice. I've also been struggling with a cough as well, so I'm trying to hold it in as well. Thank you so much, Danny and Candice, for attending. I know we've gone slightly over our time. There's a number of questions on the chat group. So I think, in general, my takeaway is that there's so many things to look at. We've got to be proactive. The vulnerability and penetration tests, or looking at your IT system, is probably the key starting factor to actually know what you need to address. But there's never, I guess, 100% safe situation. And that's why we take out the cyber insurance that you speak about, Candice, and help us mitigate, that remaining risk that we can't really, prevent. Thank you for coming again. We've had you previously, and we look forward to having you again with us. If anyone would like to get in touch with Daniel and Candice, their details are on your screen at the moment, so you can contact them there. We will share the slides as well as the webinar recording with you via email, so you will have access to this and you can get in touch with them via that mechanism as well. And to end off, I'd like to say to any of our corporate members that may be online to look out for a great member benefit that's going to come your way, thanks to Danny, around reviewing your firewalls. Hey, Danny, I think that's what we're going to offer. So please look out for that in the upcoming months or so. That's going to be a corporate member benefit that you will see. So thank you, and we will see you all again next month for our next session.